Today we have lecture 3. In lecture 3 we will discuss about the overall housing situation in our country. We have basically 3 parts to describe the housing situation. First we will discuss the housing gap, or shortage. Next we will discuss some typical characteristics, and then finally we will discuss few issues and concerns. Based on these issues and concern, our whole discussion on the housing policy and planning will depend. So, let us start with the housing gap and shortage. You know that India is second most populous country in the world after China, and we have almost 130 crores of population, and a major portion of this population does not have any livable house. As per the government data, we have right now almost 20 million shortage. Now this 20 million housing shortage, these are based on various shortage calculation given by the government departments and also other departments. Now what does it mean, this 20 million housing shortage? It means that in urban area and rural area, in urban area 1 out of 6 person does not have any livable house. Out of 6 person, 1 person does not have any livable house. In rural area it is 1 out of 10 person that does not have livable house. That is the overall situation. Now what are the types of this shortage, how it is calculated, what type of shortages are there? Now this let us see that this shortage is based on basically 3 parameter. One is, you know that there are various people who are basically living on the streets, who are surviving on the streets or the open public land, who are basically termed as homeless. They are basically surviving on streets, pavements, railway stations, in the bus terminals without any proper shelter. Second part, or second group of people who have the house, but those are obsolete or dilapidated. That means those houses are in a condition or in a structural condition which is not livable condition, and which may occur, which may cause any time any disaster or any damage to the property. So sometimes it is called as unserviceable kacha structure. You recall my last day's lecture that there are 3 types of houses based on the structural quality. One is kacha, another is semi pakka and pakka. So within the kacha there are some structures which is unserviceable because they are dilapidated or obsolete. That is why those are counted under the shortage, second part. Third, there are houses mostly in the slums or in squatters where people stay together, more than one family stay together, which causes congestion. Now how congestion is defined? As per the government of India, the congestion is defined in a room if there is more than 2 family, or if more than one family with another adult person in the same room, that time in that cases those are called congestion factor, and thus congestion factor will cause need for another new house, and based on this congestion factor it will increase the housing shortage. So, congestion factor is nothing but the amount of housing need coming from the families where more than one family is living in a same room or same house. So, that is the congestion factor. So, homelessness, house obsolescence and congestion factor, these three criterias they make this housing shortage. And not only that, based on this is the present shortage what we have discussed, based on the population increase, we have to satisfy the house for the future population. So, there will be some additional future need of house. Therefore, the future need of the house and the current need, which is 20 million, the actual need of the house is much more than we envisage. So, that is the housing gap or housing shortage in total. Now, let us see that what are the basic characteristics of this housing shortage in India. What are the major characteristics or major trends or direction of this shortage? Firstly, there are various types of disparity in this shortage. For example, urban and rural. The urban houses are pakka, sometimes unauthorized, sometimes having more congestion, more congested areas, slums and squatter, and also the rate of the homelessness is more there. Rather than in rural area, there are homelessness situation is much lesser, but the structural conditions are poor structurally. They own land, whereas in urban area they sometimes do not own the land, especially in slums and squatter. Therefore, the urban areas, the number wise it is 1 out of 6, and in rural areas it is 1 out of 10 household who does not have any livable house. Second discrepancy or the characteristics of the housing situation in India is the supply and demand mismatch. You know that housing provision is sometimes categorized based on the economic group. I discussed last day lecture in the lecture 2. So, those are basically HIG, higher income group, MIG, LIG and EWS. Now, the 20 million housing shortage which I discussed, if you discuss the 20 million housing shortage, the amount of shortage for EWS and LIG, lower income group, it will be 96% and it will be only 4%. So, this is very strikingly striking figure which we should keep in mind before going into any discussion. On the other hand, if we see the supply, how the market supply the housing, the supply of housing is more here around 85% and roughly 50%. So, you can see the discrepancy, whereas they have less amount of requirement in terms of percentage, but they get maximum house. They have the more number of requirement, but they get less house in terms of the supply. So, that is the supply demand mismatch, that is very important part in housing situation of India. Third is the housing situation, housing development in India primarily is plotted house. Mostly we build our house, we buy a plot, we make our house, and this is the predominantly more practices we see in urban areas as well as rural areas. So, private plotted and an individual. These are the predominant set of practice in India. However, in urban areas you will find a trend towards more development of group housing, where more people will stay together in multi-storied apartments and will share the land cost, share the main infrastructure cost to stay close to a city. That is the major characteristics of the Indian housing situation. And there are many other situations like land. In India, the land is very scarce, it is not very much available, especially in bigger cities like Mumbai, Kolkata, Delhi. You will find, or many other bigger cities, you will find that the purchasing of one piece of land will cost crores of money. So you cannot, as a person, as a common person, as a common man, as an individual person, it is very difficult, sometimes it is impossible or near to impossible to purchase a land. So therefore the land available for the individual person is very, very unaffordable. On the other hand, land, the bigger parcels of the land which are sometimes uncommon in urban areas, unless government takes care of the land assembly, or they acquire the land and provide the land to the private developer. So that is the situation of the land. So that is the, so it is scarce, and unless you plan it, you manage it, you assemble it, the large chunk of land, especially in the urban areas or around the urban areas, is not that much, very much available for the housing. That is the most important challenge in housing sector in India. Fifth part is the delivery of the housing based on the construction method. Mostly in Indian condition, the construction is done at the site using the traditional age-old construction process. For example, the beams, column and the load bearing walls, and also local practices are there. But this method are predominantly basically slow method. Slow. How much slow? Usually, generally a group housing project takes roughly 3 to 4 or sometimes 5 years time for the construction and completion, whereas there are technologies available where you can construct the house within even 1 year. So one major characteristics of the construction method currently we are applying in the housing sector, that it is mostly labor oriented. Skilled, unskilled and semi-skilled laborers are employed here, they get the job. That is why we are continuing this, but there are opportunities and government programs will come one by one. Next lecture, that where you will find that within few times there will be few technologies where we will be able to deliver a house within very short period of time, like 1 year or 1.5 years. Then we come to few more characteristics like the affordability and finance. Now, since I have told that LIG and EWS people, lower income group people and economical weaker section people, they have 96% of the total housing shortage. On the other hand, they have very low affordability, because the money they earn per day they usually spend for their daily living, food and other basic requirement. So after that only they have very few amount of money which they can spend for their housing. So this low affordability of the towards housing for the low income group and economically weaker section is very, very important phenomenon in Indian situation. That is why you will find in cities various slums, squatter settlement, pavement dwellers, the shanty, bastis, chawls, joggi jhopris, these are all manifestation of their lower affordability to afford a formal house or to afford a normal livable house, because their earning is very less, whereas their shortage is very high, 96%. Apart from this, Indian housing situation is characterized by various different kind of properties. Like, if you recall our discussion from the last lecture, where we discussed various typologies of house, like say organic, planned and informal. So, within the planned options which we discussed last day, that the private developers house, government developers house, cooperative housing, rental housing, employees housing, the supply in the categories of rental housing is very less. The housing shortage which I discussed and showed, it is basically based on the shortage in terms of the family, but there are situations that a single person or a single person with his son or daughter, they are staying in a city with a small apartment. Those kind of housing shortage was never estimated, and that is a great requirement. There is a great requirement in our cities to create those kind of housing shortage, like rental housing. A person might be coming to a bigger city from a smaller city or village for their job or any purpose, and he may not afford a bigger apartment or bigger house. On the other hand, he may get a apartment, small apartment on rent for a short duration stay. Therefore, the non-family housing need is less taken care of in our country. So, when we make the policy for the housing, the non-family housing need should be taken care. Next day, when we discuss the provision or the planning intervention, government intervention, that time you will see that I will discuss that recently government has made a task force to make a housing policy for rental housing. That means the focus from the family based housing need to the non-family and the low duration housing need is being given preference by the government of India. That is another very important part of the housing situation in India. Now, based on the housing situation, now what are the key issues? So, basic key issues is, number one, if we see the so these issues and problems will get a direction, give a direction for the further discussion of the policies and planning. So, number one is the shortage, which I discussed, is increasing. Ever increasing from 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. It is not coming down. So, therefore, the inference is that the supply and our shortage is not balancing. We are short of the supply than the requirement. Number two, the mismatch. Mismatch I discussed. Mismatch between the income group and the supply demand mismatch between the urban and rural, mismatch between the requirement of the non-family house and the less supply of the non-family house. Those are the mismatch. These mismatches need to be taken care of. The third issue which we should also discuss is the land and finance. When you talk about the finance, it is the individual finance of the people. With that, the people can buy a house, buy an apartment, and also it is the institutional finance. With that, a developer, a small developer can develop a project, develop a housing project. So, both these are very important, crucial issue in terms of availability in India. That we will discuss one by one. And fifth, our governance or operation delivery and which is related to your technology, etc., which is very slow, in a particular year, in a particular government organization, housing board or development authority, they are not able to cater to the need of the local people. So these are the issues which will guide us, which will basically give a frame, which will give you a kind of a window through which we can study the housing policies and the planning, and we can discuss and analyze. Now let us see some slides to summarize whatever we have discussed so far. So in this slide you can see how the housing shortage is increasing, ever increasing. Only for the rural housing shortage it is still there, maintaining horizontally, but otherwise the total housing, for the total housing and the urban housing, it is ever increasing, and as on 2001 it was around 24 million. Right now also it is about 20 to 24 million as based on various data. So out of 10 household, 1 household does not have house in the rural areas, whereas in urban areas 1 out of 6 household they do not have any livable house. That is the situation. This is the most important significant mismatch in Indian condition. I already discussed. You can see this is the shortage and this is the market supply. This is the shortage for the economically weaker section and LIG, and this is the shortage for the MIG and HIG, whereas the market supply is more for this group and this is very meager for this group. That is why this is very important mismatch. Now urban rural disparity, supply demand mismatch, non-family housing need we have already discussed, and diverse construction practices. In India we have traditional construction practices based on the various geographical area. We have several states, several different geographical location, climatic region. So we have diverse construction practices here. Prescribing a single construction, prescribing a single technology or design may not match, may not be purposeful for our housing need or housing supply. So predominantly we have plotted housing, but in cities we have now cities are going towards more to group housing and multi-storied compact houses. Affordability issues are there, land crunch I have told you, and government's priority. Since housing is a basic need for the people, apart from the food and the clothes, housing is the third or the next important basic need. There are always attention by the government, and right now government has launched various schemes for the housing that we will discuss one by one. So based on this, these are the characteristics, and we have identified few issues which we discussed already. One first is the incremental nature of the shortage, which is incremental, not reducing. Multiple levels of multiple types of disparities there. The land supply, making land available and its management in the city level, how we dispose the land, how we get the land, how we distribute the land, that is always a issue. Making finance available, finance for the individual housing finance, for the institutional, for the project finance, both are issues in the India. And the technology and the slow delivery, which we discussed there also, that is the most important issue. These are major issues. Apart from these, there are various problems associated, we will discuss one by one, and based on this there are various interventions in terms of programs, schemes and guidelines government of India they have come up, and from last 20 or 30 years or even so, the government's idea, outlook towards housing has changed a lot. So that we will discuss in the next section, next lecture, with the government intervention in the housing. We will see that after the independence, how 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and now how we have changed from a provision mode to a facilitator mode, market mode, where we are encouraging the private developer or the financier to come up and to deliver more housing. That I will discuss the next day. So next lecture will be on the policy and public intervention, part 1. This may take several lectures. So first part will be discussed next day. Thank you.